And then, on the seventh day, God rested. But then he realized that it was a little boring. And he was sort of, horny. So all work and no play makes God a very dull boy. So anyway, on the seventh day, God created jacking off. And it was good. As a matter of fact, it was so good. Yeah, like moved mountains good. Because once again, God's cock makes a billionaire's cock looks like a little Chinese daint. But I digress. Welcome to the Chanel Ashby podcast, where we discuss and review erotica with fancy music, as well as fetishes, fucking, and all forms of smut. So it's kind of like Chanel's doing God's work every day. Please join us for another episode of this podcast brought to you by the EIP Network, Excellence in Porn. Hi, Chanel. How are you?
I'm excellent, Chris. How are you?
I'm good.
I just was listening to you read that, and which it sounds very good. I just want to say that it should be, what's the 3 F's? Fetishes, fucking...
And fisting?
And fornication.
Sure, we can go that route.
Right.
Fornication is good.
The 3 F's.
Right. This has been, how's your week been?
It's been okay. I've had better.
Yeah, well, hopefully next week will be better for you.
Right.
Right.
And I got some good smut out there.
You did. And Penelope's doing nasty, nasty things to sissies.
Right. And there's 5 Chanel Ashby titles on the top 100 Amazon erotica list for sissies.
Right. We're working towards having you be the top 10. All of them.
Total domination.
Right. Yeah, you know all about domination, don't you? Right. So this week is a very special podcast because we're going to devote all our reading, which is usually 5 stories and then a very, very bad romance. But we're going to dedicate it all to one story. And this is OG smut is what this is. Because this smut's like 65 years old, and not like the 65-year-old like dangling balls down your knees or titties down to your waist. This is like smoking hot.
The story of O is pretty classic.
Right.
And classy. Too classy for us, actually, but we're going to attempt to review it in a non-disgusting way.
It's definitely a lot classier than I'm used to.
Right.
But, $2 lap dances will put you at a certain level.
With wing sauce all over.
Right.
How did you enjoy the story of O?
I had a boner most of the time, actually.
Really? Most of the time.
Right.
And it's not a long read, I just want to say, to some people who maybe are used to the, 5,000 word, I beat my meat. It's going to be longer than that, but it's maybe 2-3 hours.
Right, at the most. And so I was reading it on my pay-as-you-go Cricket phone. So, hey, Cricket, if you guys are looking for sponsors, ChrisPLove69 at gmail.com.
I'm sure that Cricket would love to be on this
Right.
show.
I think they would. It's our audience. But so I was reading it on there, and my phone said it was 95 pages.
There you go.
So,
right.
But it was, it's a small screen, so 95 pages isn't that long.
Right.
Right. So, but it follows the story of a woman named O and her lover, Renee, and
it's French, by the way.
It's very French, but not in that like snooty, cunty way that most French people are known for. This writer must have been half American because she did a really great job writing it, not in a cunty way. So that should be pointed out.
I do think that a couple of the things make you instantly know that it's French. First of all, the Parisian streets and whatnot, that's a dead giveaway. But the fact that the author is so pay so much attention to clothing.
Well, the
details of the clothing, that might be the one place where it drags you just a little bit. However,
of course, the main character is a fashion photographer.
Right, and so that's lending to the whole
backstory.
thing. However, fetishists, true fetishists, say you're into, stockings with a Cuban heel. You like every little bit of that detail in the story. And this is, fetishism and BDSM have a long history, and clothing is a big part of BDSM.
Well, and they spend a lot of time talking about what you can and can't wear, what the other participants wear.
Right, and how she has to be clothed but basically naked.
Right. Basically, they reference the fact that she needs to be open. Every orifice needs to be open at any time to be used.
Right.
So she can never, sit with her legs crossed. She has to always, whenever she's sitting, have her legs apart.
Right.
She can never even close her mouth because her mouth needs to be open. And at one point, and this was particularly hot, is they decide that her butthole, or as I call it, the candy canal,
right,
is a little too tight.
It needs to get stretched out.
For 4 days, I think. No, 3 days. Every day they put a bigger butt plug up there to get it to a good point.
Yep.
Right. It's like a flashback to early Americana. It really is what it should be. Hello, 1950.
Up the dirt road.
It's a back alley passage, my friend, and it's wide open.
Okay, so I know you were going to do a little spiel here, but I was going to just say that the story of O is... So it starts off, she's a female photographer in Paris in the 50s. So she's a working, independent woman, which I think should be noted at the beginning of the story. And as you kind of go along with the story, you get... I like the fact that it starts with absolutely no backstory. You're just dropped in.
It literally starts with her in the backseat of a car with her lover, who then tells her that she has to remove her garter belt, panties, and bra, goes to the point of cutting the bra off of her, and then sends her to an anonymous door where, in stories from today, her training begins.
Right. So we have no idea if she's agreed to this, what kind of relationship they had up to that point. But I think that's a great way to start, because then the author has the liberty to give you backstory later. But O is the dominant person in her other relationships, which is what you'll find out later on in the story, and not in a BDSM way, but she runs the relationship with men and with women. Jacqueline, hello, Jacqueline. Right.
And Jacqueline's little sister is 15.
Right. That was a little dicey right there.
That would not be on Amazon today.
Right.
I'll tell you what.
Clearly stating that she's 15.
15 going on 16.
Right. And if O weren't forbidden, she'd be getting it on.
Well,
15-year-old.
Well, she ends up getting it on with a really fat dude named the Commander later, and seems to really like it. But we're getting ahead of ourselves.
So basically, she's a dominant. She was a dominant person essentially in her relationships. Then she goes to Rossi without her lover, drops her off there, but he's around for the first week.
And Rossi should be explained that this is a chateau, and that's how we also know it's French, because they can't just say house.
Right, can't be a house.
No, it can't be. It's a chateau in the country, we assume, because they had to drive there, and it seemed to take a while. But she is left there with basically to be used by anyone in the house, and more importantly, to be whipped daily, and in some cases hourly, flogged.
Yep,
etc.
lots of S. in
right.
BDSM.
To basically break her will.
And
even though she's there of her own free will, but she is still a very, I think up until 2/3 of the way through the book, she's still kind of fighting it a little bit.
Well, and flogging is something that is done for more of an effect than it is for actual pain. Even in the writing, it's not the pain so much as it is, mental anguish that she's worried about what's going on between her and her lover, considering that she's there being a hoe.
She spends a fair amount of time looking for his approval through the "I love you and I'm going to be with you," which oddly enough, at the end of the book, he is nowhere to be found. And she seems okay with that.
Right. There's a turning point there. That's where she's broken. It's not when she's at the chateau. It's later on in the book, because Renee, as you come to find out, is a chump and not really a dom. So he's like, the fake doms that you meet.
He actually can't even, and she realizes just prior to being broken that he cannot do these things to her.
Right.
And
he can watch.
He can watch, but he's not capable of actually doing this.
Right. Because he's not really dominant.
No, and we find out he's actually submissive to a real dom dude, not in a gay, faggy way, just in you're a better man than I am, so I'm going to give you
and that's kind of a weird dynamic right there as well. I mean, like throughout the book, there's different levels of dominant submission. And Sir Stephen is portrayed initially as, the quintessential dom. He is cold. He is going to dominate her without there being any emotional involvement.
He even tells her that you've been dominated with love.
Right.
Because you love him and you submit to him because you love him, you're going to submit to me. Not because you love me, but just because. Right.
And then that's where they kind of go into the explanation of, where she's been the dominating factor in her relationships prior to that. And initially is submitting to Sir Stephen because of the whole lover factor. Like she's afraid that somehow he's going to poison Renee. But there's a point, and that's where she breaks. When Renee tells her that he loves the other woman, Jacqueline. If you notice, like the writing even changes tone at that point. She's just complacent in everything. She is totally submitted. And it's not... the writing style is less colorful. Now she's more of just an object. She's a whole. She's 3 holes, basically. And
they get used quite frequently throughout the book. Right.
And after, she loses the lover, basically. And then, she doesn't really care. And at the end, when Sir Stephen is like, nah, I'm out.
Well, he's moved on to a 15-year-old.
Right, exactly.
To the point that he's offering to give her away to the master. And so she's, basically getting shuffled around and in between getting used by just about anybody who wants to use her.
Right. And then, so really the end of her fighting it was giving up on love, which is a sad part of, this book is sad.
It's very sad.
You're not going to get a spoiler alert, but you're not going to get a happy ending. You might, give yourself a happy ending, I guess.
There are many parts in this book that are very hot. But the overall sentiment to the story is one really of sadness and despair.
Right.
Because this woman who basically submits to the man she loves just to find out months later that he's gone and she's getting passed around like Halloween candy.
Right. And I do think it's kind of an interesting take on You know, because this is written in the 1950s, and even if it was written by a woman,
as letters, correct?
As letters to her boyfriend. Her boyfriend was a French author who had a thing for Marquis de Sade, and had told
There's
her,
another dude that you should, all you listeners, should read.
Oh, definitely. We have to talk about 120 Days of Sodom at some point, because that would be super classy and terribly gross.
Right, because animals, children, women, men.
Everything that you can't do now.
Just right. But it's a classic, so I bet you can find that on Amazon.
Right. But anyway, she had written this as a series of letters, and he had told her, like, point blank, you know, a woman could never write like Marquis de Sade. And, you know, so she showed him, and he got it published. However...
Did he keep all the money?
You know what? He probably fucking did.
Douchebag Frenchie.
Well, you know, it's not even like a Frenchie thing, I think so. And maybe it is partially a Frenchie thing so much, but it's the 1950s, and good girls don't.
This girl did.
And that's what I'm saying.
At least in her head.
The wind up, even though it's written by a woman, I think that the wind up is, you know, if you were a good girl, this wouldn't happen to you. It's a cautionary tale.
It is, even to the point, and certainly not to spoil the end, but apparently there's a second chapter that is out there where...
There's a part 2 that supposedly is out there, although whether or not that was actually written, because the original writer didn't come forward and say she had written it until 40 years later because of the fallout of this book. You know, the validity of part 2 being hers is like a question. Really, it's just, you know, it ends with she's probably going to off herself and just take it for what it's worth. They've done movies. They've done, you know, this is something that's been, you know, long before 50 Shades of Grey, and even before, you know, Anne Rice did a whole series that was BDSM. Before any of that, there was the story of and it's still considered pretty scandalous.
Well, it was like banned back in the 50s, and
it was.
Britain wouldn't let it be printed in the UK.
Books in the UK, yeah.
Right.
And although it had won a literary award in 1955 in France, the court system was trying to press charges of obscenity against the publisher. So, you know, still being persecuted for writing.
Well, I tell you what, it's a lot better than 50 Shades of Pooh.
It's not only is it beautifully written, but it's the dirtiest book you've ever read without anything dirty at all.
Right, because oddly enough, the sex part of it are pretty brief.
Right? The sex is brief. She never says anything about her pussy. You know, she uses very proper English throughout.
She uses interesting references towards her body parts.
Her belly is her vagina.
Right.
Right.
And the cleft. The cleft of her buttocks is her like asshole.
Right. And then, you know, she references the clitoral hood. And apparently, you know, it's the 50s. They still all have bushes back then.
Right. And
you know, it's a big
all the
deal
body
to get it all
hair,
shaved.
all the body hair had to come off. And they even talk about waxing briefly, where she actually explains waxing,
right, because nobody did it back then.
Except because unless you're French, and then you did everywhere except your pits,
right? That the women had armpit hair,
right?
Which is totally French, because ew,
right? That's disgusting. I don't even have armpit hair. That's how disgusting it is.
Right. So you know it.
I mean, the writing is beautiful to the point that she actually references where she places the perfume on her body to make herself more desirable.
And the lipstick on her cooch.
Right.
I always thought that was real interesting.
And the rouge on her her areolas.
Her nipple rouge.
Right, which in one particular case was not dark enough for Sir Stephen's liking, and she got a little bit of a spanking for that.
A little spanky.
Right.
I do think it's interesting that, unlike maybe more modern takes on BDSM, it's really, there's floggings. And yeah, it kind of hurts, and a couple of times where she gets it between the legs. I'm sure that.
Well, oddly enough, that it seems like the most brutal beating between the legs was actually from another woman.
Right. There you go. And then of course the branding. That's yikes. But that comes. That
comes very very late in the story, and it's very brief.
Right. So the pain is. It's on the periphery. It's really all about the mental breakdown. And you see it a lot. You see it right away when she's in the car and it's like, okay, you're bare ass on the seat. Well, these kind of things where you're constantly in your head reminded about what you're wearing, what you're supposed to be doing, how you're supposed to be. This is how a dominant breaks down a submissive person. It's being in your head.
It's brainwashing is really what it is.
Right. And so, it's a great example, and I would definitely recommend it to anybody who's like maybe new to or interested in any kind of BDSM play. Read this. Because it is, if for nothing else, because I didn't think it was hot in as much as I thought it was sad, but I loved the story. I've read it a million times. But it's a perfect example of how to be in someone's head.
Right, because she really lets them in. Like open the barn doors, come on in.
When she comes out of the chateau, all of the teaching, it's like basic training almost. And she comes out and she can't get back to her normal life.
No, she tries to go back to work and
and it's not the ring that she's wearing that, makes it, it's all of the little elements mentally.
We should point out that when you leave the chateau after 2 weeks of basically them breaking you down, they give you a ring that you have to wear on your left hand, like almost like a wedding ring.
Right.
And it's a special ring that signifies you're a submissive to this group, this cabal.
Right.
Also known as the RNC.
Right. It's very Republican Party
right
there.
Very rich and
going to the chateau to fuck young girls and boys.
There's a reason I'm a Republican. But they give you this ring and you've got to wear it and you have to submit to anyone else who has the corresponding ring of the dominant in any way, shape, or form that they want.
Right. There's no, I'm sorry, I'm like not down for that today.
No,
There's
it's
none of that.
Right.
There's just, you're getting it on. Something that's very interesting, and I was thinking of it when I was just kind of reviewing the book yesterday. This is 1950s. No birth control pill. And yet, no pregnancy scare. Nothing's going on where any of that's talked about. No STDs, no nada.
I bet you she got fucked by 30 dudes in this book.
At least.
And 2 or 3 women.
Right. And there's no, it was like a different time.
But what really made it so good, even transcending the certain segments that I found very, very hot, was it was timeless.
Right? That could be today.
I read it, I knew it was written in the 50s, but reading it, you get lost in the story, and you don't even realize that it's 65 years ago.
Right.
That this was written. It was literally like somebody could have pumped it out and put it on Amazon today, and you wouldn't even know.
Oh, and there's a lot of the same themes and stuff that is on Amazon, like right this second, like 2 dudes, with one chick. Hello, that happens. Like, women just buy that over and over and over and over and over. This whole, like, there's a secret underground society where BDSM, for some reason, BDSM and secret underground shit always correspond. Nobody just thinks that, like, the dude who lives down the street is into BDSM.
Well,
it's got to be all, like, secret for some reason. So that seems to still go together as a thing.
Hey, all you crazy people, I think it's secret. Go online. The BDSM clubs actually want you to come. They tell you when and where.
Right? There's no, like, decoder ring.
No, there's really no super secret society. Usually it's like $20. You're in.
Right? Yeah. You got to show your driver's license because
Right.
everybody has to know who everybody is.
Right.
So not secret, but for some reason, usually as a literary reference, that whole, like, secret society part goes with BDSM over and over and over and over. So I was looking for one other thing I wanted to say. Oh, that I read while reviewing this book.
Yes.
That you think, and I think, and everybody thinks it's the story of and you kind of, when you pick the book up, you think, well, yeah, it's short for, they're using the initial. It's like a anonymity kind of thing, like maybe
orgasm.
Like maybe that's, her name begins with O, and she wants to make sure that no one knows who she is. But I was reading today that somebody had written a paper on this book and said that, O, as far as they're concerned, stands for orifice. Because at the end of the book, all she is the 3 holes.
She's a cum dump.
Right? And I thought that was really interesting because, yeah, it kind of does. It breaks her down to essentially just 3 holes.
To the point that they reference at the end of the story that this second chapter or book or whatever the case may be.
The continuation.
The continuation is that she actually asks Sir Stephen to let her kill herself, and he consents.
Right.
Because he doesn't want her anymore. So, and she's just a husk of a person. I mean,
which is kind of, all the really good love stories end with some kind of tragedy. So that would be, although I actually believe that the ending as it is the best ending. You don't know what happens, and you shouldn't, because really this is one of the reasons why I love this story. You picked up the story exactly where it should have been picked up, and the author let you off at exactly the right point, where the author really dominates the reader right from the beginning. I'm going to tell you what you need to know, and that's it.
That's true.
So I liked the tone of the writing as well.
It was excellent writing. The imagery that she writes is, as a writer yourself, you must hope that one day that you publish something that is as captivating. And your work is exceptional. I've read a fair amount of it.
Oh, I would love to think that, at some point. Well, here's...
Or more importantly, that your readers think that.
Not that I need to read
Right.
it and think it's captivating. That someone else thinks it's captivating. But, erotica, real erotica, like the story of O, and I'm going to say some of Anne Rice's earlier writing where she was under Anne Roliquette or whatever the hell her last name was when she was fake writing.
When she was writing smut.
When she was writing smut. Like some of that erotica or, the Venus of Delta or stuff that was written back when it was actual erotica was a beautiful story that did stand on its own. Most of what we read today, period, across all genres, whether it's crime stories or whatever whatever book du jour that you pick up at the airport, is usually not a beautifully written story. It is pumped out shit that somebody put on a shelf because we're all about.
Hello, James Patterson. How are you?
Hey, no, and I props because James Patterson is not
#1 fiction author in North America.
But he's not necessarily the smartest guy in the room, and he's not necessarily the best writer in the
He's
room.
the richest.
But he showed everybody else, here's how you market the fuck out of your books.
Well,
and he's excellent at that.
And you write a formula.
And you write the formula, and if you step outside of the formula, you're not the #1 author. So who's going to say no to the cheddar? However, back in the day, like when Story of O was written, this woman didn't do that for the money.
Now she did it to say, fuck you, boyfriend.
Right?
I can do this.
That's back when, Catcher in the Rye. That guy didn't write that for the money. Or, I don't know. All the classics. They didn't write that shit for the money. They did that because they had to write. Like it was, they were fucked up in the head.
It was percolating in their head and they had to get it out.
Right. And so it's two totally different kinds of
kind of
writing.
like you, 4 a.m.
It's, two different kinds of writing. It's, I'm a cash station and this is what I write because I have to write. But I believe that all authors, even when they're a cash station, they have this other thing that's going on in the back of their head.
I would like to think that James Patterson aspires to write the great American novel.
I think James Patterson,
I think he's too busy picking out a Tesla with all the cash he got from the last book.
I think James Patterson and probably every other author, and every author, people that have never published a book sit and they write and they piddle around with this one perfect little book. With this one little book that they would love to have out there. But, if you're a James Patterson, you're not going to publish that book, at least not under your name.
Right.
Actually, I just read an interview with Anne Rice, who has just recently put out a new vampire book. So, she tried the God stuff for a while. Now she's back on vampires because, let's face it, she made a fuck ton of money on
this will be a bestseller.
Right. And the guy who's interviewing her asked, would you ever go back and write any more erotica? And she said, she's thought about it. But she would definitely do it under a different name.
Now, did she write the romance erotica?
It wasn't. I'm gonna have to say
like a cross between romance and smut, somewhere in between.
It was for women, but it wasn't romantic. The Beauty series, which I'll have to give you one of those one of these days. It wasn't romantic, but it was definitely written for women.
That probably wouldn't work for me then.
You know what? I'm going to say it probably would actually work for you.
Really? Why is that?
Because
this should be interesting, listeners.
It had plenty of sex, and it was very BDSM. But when I say written for women, I just mean
backstory.
And maybe not even so much backstory. Like the Story of O. I'm going to say that's written for a woman because there's more to it than just beat your meat, end of the story. And not to take anything away from male readers because they are my customers. God bless them. But usually male readers, regardless of what they're reading, it's I want to get to the point. I want to, who's the bad guy, who killed somebody, who's a spy. It's all very, cut, dry.
Very task orientated.
Right? Exactly. Just the way that a man thinks. It's boom, boom, boom. A, B, C. And whereas writing that's geared more for a woman is going to meander a little. If that makes sense.
No, that's okay. I don't mind a little meandering sometimes. Okay. I thoroughly enjoyed this. And I had never heard about it until you actually sent it to me.
Aren't you feeling classier now?
I love it when I get emails from you with porn in it. And I open it up. I'm like, 95 pages. Oh, it's going to be a while. I better take my pants off.
Well, and who would ever stop you from taking your pants off?
Right? You don't.
Well,
thank God.
Right. So the story of O, I wouldn't give it any boners personally, because if you're looking to jerk off, there's a lot more. The sex is not descriptive.
The
but
sex
it
is
kind of
the
keeps
sex,
you on a low boil throughout.
And that's probably the best description. Is it would be very hard to get the happy ending on this, but you could percolate pretty good through it.
Right, and I think it's great for ideas on role play. If you're a couple, like, I'm home, honey, I'm cutting your bra off. So that's a great way to start the evening. Lots of blindfolding, she's blindfold and led places, so that's very, it's throwing you off your center of balance. Someone else is totally in control of even where you're going, how you're walking, making sure you don't fall down, all of that.
I checked a lot of those things off in the back of my brain.
Right? Check.
Right.
The fact that, she's given zero control, about her wardrobe, about, okay, when she goes to see Sir Stephen, he gets rid of her at the end of the evening, as if to say, ugh, you're just a whore. And just the whole, so there's
and we'll even go to the point to where she might have to wait. So
he keeps her waiting. I love that.
Right.
That's very you're on my time now.
Right.
Keep you waiting, and doesn't really doesn't fuck her pussy.
And
fucks her mouth and her ass a lot.
Right.
But nothing for her pleasure.
Right.
Nobody's going down on O in this story. There's nothing there about O ever. Actually, I don't think O ever has an orgasm. Sadly, there is no O for O.
No, I believe there is. I believe she actually does once.
When?
But not by a dude. It's when she's with, she gets sent off to, Sir Stephen sends her off to get her ready to get branded.
Oh,
and
the woman.
And the woman that's there the night before they pierce her clit.
Right.
To put these giant, basically jingly locks on her clit. It basically gets her off.
Right, like one last hurrah.
Right, enjoy it now.
And I do think it's interesting when she's describing her dalliances with other women that all women are passive. I mean, in this story. Now, is that based on the author's point of view? Is that, because it's the 1950s and women are just passive?
Well, except for her first dalliance with a woman, which they allude to and seems to reference that perhaps this was her first sexual encounter, was with this when she was much younger, to the point that she was so embarrassed by it that she couldn't even masturbate.
Right.
Because the girl, as is described, was masturbating in front of her, and ultimately they have a little lesbian fling. But when Sir Stephen wants her to masturbate, she can't.
Right. So still, even as freeing as maybe this should be, because it's BDSM, that still plenty of sexual hang-ups and shame and slut-shaming.
Right.
And Sir Stephen pretty much tells her, all this sharing you is great for you because you're a whore.
It says that exact same thing.
And,
you're worthless.
Right.
Which is why it's so sad, because these people just basically use her to the point that she's nothing.
Cautionary tale. I'm going with, it's, even though it's written by a woman who obviously was pretty open-minded for her time, I'm going to say it's still a cautionary tale about being a slut.
It's just an excellent read.
Right. And
I usually like reading about sluts. So that's a good thing.
So we're worked out perfectly for you.
Right, it really did. So I also wanted to, because, though this is a special episode, we always want to leave one thing from our usual episode. So as our tour of America continues, this week we visit Duluth, Minnesota. Hey, Minnesota. I hope you're enjoying fall.
Right, because it's probably snowing there already.
Probably. So,
aren't they like the state where that one coat company tests their coats?
Right. Well, they're also the state that whenever you watch the news and they talk about the weather, it's like the coldest place in the U.S. because it's right there at the Canadian border.
Oh, okay.
And so it's like negative, like 82 there, and yet in Miami it's like 90.
Right.
It's one extreme to the other.
Okay.
So this week.
So they have to do a lot of indoor activity.
Right. I bet you the birth rate's very high in Minnesota.
Especially, over,
over
September,
the holidays, right?
Man, they got a lot of babies coming.
A lot of Virgos. So the Duluth doorknob.
Uh-oh.
Okay, so basically what you want to do.
I just have this feeling like this is about poop.
It is not about poop.
Okay.
I'm purposely trying to stay away from poop. You're making me work harder. It's taking a while.
Right, I'm glad.
I have like 10 poop things on deck, and I'm trying not to use any of them. Right? A really fancy sailor reference right there. Right. We start talking about the coxswain.
Okay.
Also a sailor reference.
So what is the Duluth doorknob?
Okay. So what you first do is you insert a hand into your partner's anus. And then, no poo.
Well, then they had to get pretty clean ahead of time.
We're going to say they did.
Okay.
And they fasted for like a week.
Okay.
So then what you do is once you get your hand in there, you form a fist. Mm-hmm. Right? Because, why not?
Right.
And then you start wrenching it back and forth in the same motion as turning a doorknob.
Okay, so it's a fancy term for fisting someone.
Right, but instead of you get the right to left.
Right. Well, yeah. So you're hitting some of the different. Well, good news, Minnesota people got fancy fisting up there.
Right, and apparently probably small hands. So we hope.
Or big buttholes.
Oh well.
Which might no longer be airtight.
Hey, maybe you should read the story. If your butthole's too tight, you can figure out how to do it. Because they're pretty descriptive about.
I actually think that people can figure out how to stretch out their butthole pretty good without any.
Well, based on what we see on the internet every week, right?
Right.
I think 20% of all ER
visits are about things that got stuck in your butthole.
Right.
So yeah. Apparently, people have no problem stretching out their butthole. It's when maybe it went a little too far and they got to shove all that shit back up there.
Literally.
And I don't mean shit. I actually mean the stuff that's.
Yeah, that was like episode 10 or 11. We talked about that. 9 somewhere in there, but
rosebudding,
right?
And there's a point where it needs to be inside. So.
Right, you don't want that hanging out.
Yeah,
that's not cool.
Right, it's you broke it now. What are you gonna do?
Right,
you only got one,
and it doesn't grow back. Right. So we hope you enjoyed this week's show. For questions and or comments, and we welcome all your questions and comments, especially about whatever we're talking about, or if you just hate Bruce Jenner and Donald Trump too, feel free to email us.
Oh, please email us if you hate Donald Trump.
Right, or Bruce Jenner, because he's an idiot.
Right.
He's a dude in a skirt. So,
a mean dude.
Right. Leave that Doc Fiorina alone. So, okay. So, at any rate, you can email us at chrisplove69@gmail.com.
And please don't send any pictures of
rosebudding,
your clitoral piercings,
or which butt plugs you're going to insert tonight,
or being naked with only an owl mask on.
Well, maybe you can send that one. We might want to see that. Do chrisplove69@gmail.com. And we hope y'all have a good week. Please tell a friend about our podcast. We want more listeners. Bye, Chanel.
Bye, Chris.